Hello everybody. Welcome to this live session where we are going to be talking all about Amazon. Well, more specifically, we're going to be talking about the interview process at Amazon, which is one of the best interview processes that I've ever been involved with. And Amazon's one of these companies that a lot of people want to work at, but because of the rigorous interview process that they do have, it's somewhat difficult to get roles. There's a lot of demand for the roles, and there's a somewhat tricky interview process to get through. So that's what I want to discuss today, and I have a very, very special guest with me. And to give a bit of background, so when I worked at Amazon, I was very fortunate to interview around 100 people or over 100 people when I was there. But my guest today makes me look a little bit like a sloth in that regard, because she was responsible for leading over 350 interviews. And she was also what is known as a bar raiser, which is a really important part of the interview process. And we will talk a little bit more about that later on, exactly what a bar raiser is, what they do, and even what the bar is and what that means. But before I bring on my special guest, I thought something interesting to do would be if you let me know in the comments, what was the last thing that you purchased off Amazon, and when did you purchase it? How recently did you purchase it? Because I know that with all of the lockdowns and whatnot that are going on at the moment, Amazon is just going from strength to strength. So I'm sure we are all using Amazon almost every day. So I'd be interested to see what you're buying, and also how frequently or how recently you did it. So while you do that, I'd like to just run through a couple of very quick statistics around Amazon, which I find really fascinating. So they are the third biggest company in the world, based on market cap, valued at around $1.5 trillion, I believe. They're just behind Microsoft, and I think Apple is ahead of them at about $1.8 trillion. Jeff Bezos, the CEO, he is currently worth somewhere between 175 and 180 billion dollars. He's the richest man in the world, and I believe the richest that there's ever been. I don't think Bill Gates ever reached that high, that particular number. And they're investing in all sorts of interesting ways, and one of those is obviously AWS, which for any of my followers in the data industry will be very, very clued up on. And AWS is still the leading cloud provider, even with Microsoft Microsoft and Google chasing hard after them. So back to where I started in the introduction, we're going to be covering the interview process here. So I would like to now bring in my very special guest, and I will get her to introduce herself. So let me bring her in here. So this is GG, Gail Gallagher. So she is the Amazon interview whiz. And I said before, she's interviewed over 350 candidates, which is quite impressive. So Gail, it might be worth you introducing yourself and giving a bit of an update to everybody about what you are up to.
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Cool. Awesome. So yes, I am Gail, also known as GG, the Amazon interview whiz. I worked at Amazon for just short of 5 years. I was a marketer at Amazon, ran a big marketing team for Prime Video, then went on to something called the EU Special Projects, which I can't tell you about, I'd have to kill you. But I left Amazon back, I think it was June time. And what I'm doing now, kind of along with having a pre-retirement, as I like to call it, not retirement, but pre-retirement. Before I left Amazon, I started the Amazon interview whiz when I was bar raising, and we'll talk about what bar raising is a little bit later. But when I was bar raising, I noticed that I thought a whole bunch of candidates would probably do a lot better than they had done in interview if they just understood a little bit better how to conduct themselves in an interview and had better strategies and a toolkit for interviewing. So when I was bar raising, I literally just started posting things on LinkedIn. I'd meet someone that day, something would occur to me, and I'd just type it up on LinkedIn. And then people started asking me questions, so I started putting some more stuff on LinkedIn. And then people were asking me, could I put my videos somewhere useful, because they were really hard to discover on LinkedIn. So I created my YouTube channel, and it just kind of has kept going. And now I think I've got like an hour and 45 minutes worth of interview coaching tips and strategies available for free on YouTube. And that's what I do.
Very, very cool. So I've seen a lot of your videos too, Gigi, and I know they're really, really good. And I know from my experiences interviewing, they do obviously align very closely with the real key things that people need to know. So if you are thinking about interviewing at Amazon, if you're about to interview at Amazon, or if it's Amazon somewhere that you would like to work at some point in the future, then definitely look at Gigi's YouTube channel, because there is a lot of really, really good information there. So I asked everyone just a second ago to let me know what the last thing they purchased on Amazon was. So let's have a little bit of a look through and see what we have got here.
I mean, bear in mind, it's just Halloween. This could be interesting, right?
Yeah. Although, all right, let's see. So Susan Walsh, I know Susan really well. So she has brought new tinsel for her background. I know that she will have done that. That sounds exactly right. So if you follow Susan and you see any of her videos, you will know her tinsel very well. So I'm excited to see this new tinsel. What else do we have? Adrian, he has bought an Christmas present this morning, right?
Adrian, you are on it, man. That is well organized. God,
Yeah.
Mine happened like a week before Christmas. Thank God for Amazon Prime.
Yeah. What have we got? Ayush, you have bought a wireless mouse a few hours back. So this is Amazon though, right? Like everyone is buying almost every day. I know my household, we virtually buy everything on Amazon, especially now with the lockdown in place. It's so much easier to just go online, and that's the reason that Amazon's share price is now, I think it's over $3,000 per share. I mean, when I started working at Amazon, and this was just after you started, I think. It was only around $500, and that was only 4 or 5 years ago. So you can see, even in the last 4 or 5 years, and they were a behemoth of a company when I started, they're just really going from strength to strength. And
you know, they've got over 1 million employees now.
Really?
I only found that out yesterday. 1 million employees.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things you realize when you work at Amazon is you start to see why they're so successful. You start to see how it is that such a large company can continually add value every year. And I guess that ties quite nicely with what we're actually going to talk about here, because, and we'll touch on this a little bit in a little bit more detail later, but everything that Amazon does revolves around these leadership principles, which they have. And that's a huge part of the hiring process as well. So I think that's going to be really important to talk about. But they simplify everything. Every decision and every project relies and is guided by these leadership principles. So when we get talking about interviewing a little bit more, you'll start to see exactly why you should be thinking about these leadership principles very closely when you go into interview, because they will be judging you in those areas. Let's just have a quick look and see if we have anything else here. So Tripty, I purchased fiction books from Amazon last month. Nice. Debasis, you have bought some Lego. Nice. I hope that's for yourself. I get to play with Lego all the time at the moment, because I'm at that stage where I have 2 young children who love playing with Lego. So I get to have the Lego Renaissance, which is fantastic.
I always stand on it. I curse Lego. I'm constantly standing on it.
Oh, here we go. Daryl, magnetic science kit for my daughter yesterday. You're starting to give me some ideas too. I was looking at magnifying glasses the other day. Yeah. My daughters, I thought that could be quite cool. Or microscopes. That's what I was thinking. Microscopes. Oh. I was looking at getting a really cool microscope for my daughters, partially because I want to play with it too. Anyway, let's get started talking about interviewing at Amazon, because that's what we're here for. So before we actually start, I should probably say that the stuff we're going to talk about here is not strictly we're not representing Amazon right now. So a little bit of a disclaimer. We both worked at Amazon. We no longer work at Amazon. We're off doing different projects of our own now. So this is all, our discussion's all based on our experiences interviewing candidates at Amazon, but we're not representing Amazon directly. And I'd also like to say that I don't think we're going to talk specifically around things like what types of coding languages would be used in a technical interview or a coding interview, because that's just going to be different in each team that you might interview for across Amazon. Whereas I think what we're going to cover here is the broader topic of the leadership principles and the overarching criteria that Amazon use to determine whether they think you're a good fit for the company, because that at the end of the day is what determines whether they will hire you or not hire you. The the coding test or the technical test is just a way to see that you meet the core competencies for the role. And if you pass that to some degree, or they believe that you've got enough of those skills, then you'll move on to the next level, and that's the real crucial level. So I think we'll spend a lot more time covering that today. Anyway, so why don't I start by just asking quite a broad question for you, Gigi, which is to tell everyone a little bit more about the end-to-end interview process that Amazon has. Okay, cool. Yeah. So it starts out pretty much like any interview process would be, which is obviously you put your CV in. We have a system. I still feel like I'm an Amazonian. Like most companies, there's a candidate tracking system, application tracking system. There's lots of noise out there about that being some kind of a bot and discounting CVs. That's not the case, as I understand it. Your CV will get in front of a human being at Amazon, and they'll obviously review your CV and decide whether it's something that they want to push on. So they'll pass it to a hiring manager who'll make a decision as to whether they want to give you a first interview. So first stage, really, once you're past that, is a first interview. That'll be a leadership principle-based interview. You'll be asked a couple of leadership principle questions, depending on the level that you're interviewing at. At that point, you may be asked to do what you were just describing, Andrew, which is some of the kind of the skills-based work. So the coding tests or whatever it might be for different roles. If you get through that, some teams have 2 initial rounds. Some teams only have 1 initial round. Can't tell you exactly which ones are which, but you can expect that either if you pass through round 1, you're probably going to go to a round 2. If you don't have a round 2, they'll take you straight to panel. Round 2 will look exactly like round 1. It's just a different person asking you a different set of leadership principle questions. If you make it past that, you're then into the panel round. So the panel round is effectively what would have used to have been a full day of on-site interviews. Obviously, sadly, we're all virtual now, but it will be a full day of one-to-one interviews. Your interviews are broadly 45 minutes to an hour long, depending again on the role. You're likely to meet, and again, this depends on the role, between 5 and up to 7. I did have some poor candidates having to do 7 interviews, bless them, but up to 4 to 7 different individuals. Same process, you'll be asked the leadership principles. That group will then, once they've finished interviewing you, meet together at what's called the debrief. And I'm sure Andrew will go into a bit more detail about what happens at the debrief a bit later. But they have a debrief. Everybody gets together. Everybody shares their views and their notes on their interviews with you. Everyone will place a vote as to whether they want to offer you a hire or not offer you a hire. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is get everyone at that debrief to agree on a decision to hire or not hire. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't. And when we talk about the bar raiser, we can talk about how that final decision is made. But then a decision is made, and then fingers crossed, hopefully a higher offer is made by the recruiter contacting the candidate back. Yeah, and you mentioned the panel, it's called now, where you meet a range of different people who. Because I know from my time that it varies who you might meet when you come in. So what sort of people will you meet when you come into the panel, or who is it that you'll be interviewing? Because like you say, you could be meeting anywhere between 5 and 7 people. Who is it that you're talking to at that stage? Okay, at panel. So you should definitely be speaking to the hiring manager. There are some mitigating circumstances when that's not possible, but that's rare. So you should definitely be talking to the hiring manager. You're probably also going to be talking to 1 or 2 people who are on your immediate team, so people that would be working with you on a day-to-day basis. You're also then probably going to be talking to people who are from kind of juxtaposition teams, not your exact team, but people that you'll have to work with on a regular basis. Amazon is a highly matrixed organization. There's lots of interaction between lots of different teams. So they're going to want to know that the people that you have to work with and deliver for or deliver from are going to want to work with you and believe you're raising the bar. And then the final person that you will probably meet is a bar raiser who's probably not going to come from your area of specialty. They are a pool of individuals around the business who are specially trained to be bar raisers. So you could be someone who is recruiting for
I don't know, a BIE role, and you could easily be talking to somebody who's from transportation as your bar raiser. Their job isn't to understand your specialty. Their job is to make sure you're raising the bar in those leadership principles. And then the other ones is actually you can end up with some random people. Quite often there are a couple of spaces to fill, and they'll just pull in Amazonians from anywhere, because again, it's not necessarily about saying, in fact, it's rarely about saying whether you've got the skills. It's always about saying whether you raise the bar on the leadership principles.
Yeah, and that I know when I interviewed at Amazon, you're exactly right. And so I was going into a data specific role. So I interviewed with the hiring manager. I interviewed with somebody else from the team. I interviewed with, I think, 2 people who were in marketing, which was one of the key stakeholder teams that we're going to work with. And then I interviewed with somebody else who was in another analytics based team. And you mentioned there the bar raiser, right? So this is a big part of the Amazon hiring process. So I'd like you to go into a little bit more detail around this, because this is something that you became at Amazon. And it is interesting because the bar raiser is essentially the person that almost takes charge of the debrief in a way, don't they? They're almost more qualified than the other interviewers because they've gone through extra training. So can you give me a little bit more information around, firstly, what a bar raiser is in a little bit more detail, and then as context for that, so what is the bar that people are raising? What does that mean?
Okay, so what is the bar? Who's a bar raiser? What's their role, and what's the bar? Okay, so Amazon, I think, is quite unusual in that I've never come across any other organization that has a function called the bar raiser. The bar raiser came about, there's a little bit of Amazon kind of history for you. The bar raiser came about, as I understand it, because way back yonder, they had some pretty bad hires when Amazon was really quite small. And Jeff decided that he needed to make sure that there was a person in the interview process who didn't have skin in the game. As we'll all know, right? Sometimes you really need a bum on a seat, and the work is piling and everyone's feeling under pressure. And what that can lead to is people who aren't necessarily exactly the right fit coming in, because people have that kind of need to fill the post. And I think that's what led to some of those bad hires. So Jeff's view was, if I have somebody from outside of the team who doesn't have skin in the game, then they can be the person that makes sure we don't employ someone just because we need to fill the seat, and we employ someone because they are the right person. So that's the origin of bar raisers. What bar raisers then are is, it's about 5%, I believe, of the global population, which now at 1 million is massive, but about 5% of people. And you're kind of tagged as someone who's got strong interview skills whilst you're doing the normal interviewing process that almost everyone who's an employee at Amazon does interviewing. And effectively you go through a really intensive process of training to be a bar raiser. And that means that what you'll be doing is interviewing. So someone will be watching you and your interviewing skills, and you'll also be managing this debrief. To become a bar raiser, there's no particular time frame that it takes. There's no particular boxes you have to tick, but you have a mentor, and that person literally has to present a document to a committee to show them what you've done, the debriefs that you've run, and why you're capable of managing tricky debriefs. And tricky debriefs are where perhaps everyone can't agree, or there's particularly challenging individuals, etc. So that's kind of what the bar raiser is. So you could come from any part of the business. You can be at any level. You don't have to be a really senior person to be a bar raiser. You could be a level 5 and become a bar raiser. So it's not about your seniority. It's about your strength as an interviewer and your ability to get people to effectively come to a consensus agreement. So that's a bar raiser. And then the role of the bar raiser, it divides into 2 halves, actually. So number 1, your bar raiser doesn't get involved until you get to panel stage. So don't worry about bar raiser stuff until you're at panel. At panel, the bar raiser's job is, at first, the dull stuff, administrative. So you're responsible for making sure that you've got enough people actually on the loop, that loop has a good representation in terms of gender diversity, that the people on those loop have got enough interviews to make you feel confident that they know what they're doing, that type of stuff. And your job is then, when you're in debrief, to facilitate the meeting. And that's, like the hardest part of bar raising is your job is to make sure that everybody gets to speak, and that when people are presenting information, that the evidence is clear, that they are providing their feedback in the context of data, not opinion, that they are sticking with the leadership principles and their data is about the leadership principles, not about someone's motivation, etc. So you've got that job to facilitate and try and get everyone to agree and try and get all of the evidence out of those individuals. And then the last part is you are the barometer, exactly as you said, Andrew, about the bar. As a bar raiser, you have to feel confident that the evidence that has been presented by these 4 to 7 different individuals shows that this candidate is, 1, better than 50% of the current population at that level, and 2, and we'll talk about 2 in a minute because it's really interesting, 2, that the candidate has long-term Amazon growth potential. So that's kind of those first 2 pieces. The bar. Okay, so the bar is tricky, right? So no one can write down what the bar is. If you ask me to do that now, where's the bar for an L6 BI engineer? I couldn't do it. Well, not in the business at the moment, but you couldn't do it. What the bar is effectively, it is a sense of, if you're operating in the business every day, and this is why bar raisers have to come from business teams. It's not someone's job to be a bar raiser, because if you were off there being a bar raiser all the time and never working in the population, you wouldn't get a sense of where the bar is. The bar is a collection of your every single day experiences with people across the entire organization, across the world, at those individual levels. And you absorb how they behave. How are they behaving against dive deep? How are they behaving against learn and be curious? How are they behaving against customer obsession? Because it's just by osmosis that you're interacting with these people and gathering evidence every day in your subconscious. You get to a point where you can pin in your head, who are the amazing people? Who are the amazing people that you either want to promote because they're on your team, or you want to steal because they're on somebody else's team? And who are the people who are in the middle? We'd have them. They're great and they're solid. They're delivering. And who are the people where you think they need to lift their game a little bit? And you get that barometer. So when you're walking into a debrief and you're saying, okay, are they better than 50% of the population? All 7 of those people are going to have a sense of what that bar is and be able to make a judgment as to whether this person is above that 50% margin or below that 50% margin. And the challenge is the bar is always raising, because as I said, you're always hiring people who are above average. So if you're always hiring above average, the bar always lifts, and you're constantly hiring above the average. So the bar is always moving. It just requires you to be in the business every day, paying attention to how your colleagues perform.
Yeah, it's a very simple but clever approach to interviewing, isn't it? Like you say, it's difficult to quantify exactly where the bar is, but if the aim for everyone is to say, is this person better than half of the people that are in a similar level or similar role to them? And then you only bring in people who you believe are better than 50%. Like you say, your business is continually going to get better. It's quite a simple but effective way to do it. Something you talked about a little bit there was that the interview process is very evidence-based. And from my experiences interviewing people at Amazon, that's absolutely true. So where there was a few different styles of interviewing that people did in terms of taking notes. So in a lot of other companies, you might just sit down with somebody, talk to them, and then at the end you feel like, okay, I've got a bit of a feeling for whether I like that person, didn't like that person, or I think they could do the role or not. At Amazon, when you're interviewing, you'll find, and I believe this is still the case, that whoever's interviewing you will either be scribbling down notes on a piece of paper as you talk, or they'll be furiously typing on their laptop, not looking at you as you talk. And that's a skill as an interviewer that you get better and better at, is making sure you firstly explain to the candidate what you're doing, and that is that you are taking notes because you want to make sure that your decision is evidence-based. So you're taking notes about all of the things they've said. So when the debrief happens, and it might be a week later because you need to wait for the other people to put their notes together as well, you want to be able to remember exactly what it is that you discussed and exactly why you thought they met certain leadership principle components, or why you believe they fit the Amazon way of working, or whatever it may be. Because in the debrief, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about the debrief in a second, it's quite a rigorous session that you go through the debrief. And if you're an interviewer, you need to be able to back up your claims as to why you think they should be hired or they shouldn't be hired. And there will be times, and it happened to me several times, where everybody else, every other interviewer says, I think this person should be hired, and you believe, I don't believe they should be hired. And that will become meaningless if you can't back that up with the evidence. But I had plenty of times, and you will have as well, where everyone else said yes and you said no, and you had the evidence as to why they should be no, and that was enough to sway everybody else, because they trust you as an interviewer, and they know that if these key things haven't been met for even one of the interviewers, it's not raising the bar, or it's not what we need for this person. So can you tell me, maybe, I mean, you've covered it a little bit here so far. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that process works, or almost the power of veto in a way?
Okay, yeah.
Quite interesting.
So I'll wind back a little bit before that, because it helps the context. When you're interviewing Amazon, you are not decision making. I think that's the really important bit that you were alluding to. You're data gathering. So the skill of interviewing at Amazon is to ask the right questions in order to gather the right data. You should never leave an Amazon interview as an interviewer having made a decision. Your gut might tell you something, but you can't allow yourself to make a decision on that. You are simply data gathering. Then what happens is you go back to your desk, maybe immediately afterwards, maybe a day afterwards. I used to wait a day in order to let my emotions go and then just look at the data very rationally. And then you re-look at the data, and then you start to interrogate the data against the requirements of each of the leadership principles and the competencies that are required for strength versus concern. So you're gathering data at interview. You're then reviewing the data and making a decision behind the scenes. You're writing up that information in notes in a central system. You've probably documented your raw data in the system initially, and then you go back and you review it, and you come to effectively a conclusion as to how you feel and why you feel that way. And for each of the interview leadership principles, each interviewer will be assigned 2, probably no more than 2, against the ones that you tested for. You will make a decision as to whether you believe that that person has strength, mild strength, mixed, mild concern, and concern. And that's what you will make your hiring decision on, because you'll say, I'm based on my 2 leadership principles that I interviewed for. Maybe I gathered some extra ones because the candidate said something and it was outside my leadership principles, but I noticed it, so I'm going to write it down. You'll say, on this basis, I would like to hire the candidate. And you place that vote. And then you wait for the debrief. Everyone gets into the debrief and they read everybody's notes, because you've gone in, to your point, Andrew, with a particular view based on the evidence that you gathered. But there are potentially 5 or 6 other people that gathered evidence on different leadership principles that you didn't touch. So you have to go in and read with a completely open mind what everybody else has said about the leadership principles that they interviewed for. And it's then on the basis of that big picture, not just the 2 that you did, but the 10 that have been gathered across, what that interviewer has said, what calibration they made, how you feel about the data that they've used for that calibration. And you as an interviewer, not necessarily the bar raiser, will go in with hopefully a more open mind, having looked at that data. It's then the bar raiser's job to walk into the room and say, right, guys, based on all of your individual votes, based on only the leadership principles that you interviewed at the time, I've got 5 people who are inclined, I've got 2 people who are not inclined. Let's talk. And you spend 30 minutes in intense discussion about the data that has been gathered. You usually only focus on the key leadership principles for that role, because there will always be the ones that are more important. They're all important, but there will always be a few that are more important than others. All leadership principles were not created equal. And the bar raiser's job is to say, right, Bob, earns trust is really, really important. You've got concerns about earns trust. Tell us about why you have concerns. And then you'll say to everyone else in the room, guys, anybody else got some evidence to make us feel a bit better about earns trust. Anybody gather some data so that we can make Bob feel better that his was just a one-off. You work through those leadership principles and you try your best to get to a point where everyone agrees on the calculation, I suppose, of what the data is telling you, and take a view as to whether to hire or not hire. If you cannot get to consensus, and 50-50, I would say, with my experience, there are really only two people whose votes really count. All of the evidence matters, but there are only two people that ultimately have to make the decision. The first is obviously the hiring manager, because they're going to have to be your manager. They're going to have to live with you every single day. And if they don't want you, then that's not going to be fun for anybody. But if the bar raiser is not convinced that the hiring manager is making the right decision, and they haven't been convinced in the way that they've been convinced, the bar raising has the power of veto, where they can effectively say, look, I'm really sorry, hiring manager. I really don't think this candidate is going to raise the bar for us. So I'm going to apply my veto, and I'm sorry, you can't hire them. Doesn't happen very often. I think I vetoed maybe twice. And it's no bar raiser wants to veto, because it actually kind of means that you haven't done a great job in facilitating the meeting and making sure that all of the evidence is out. But ultimately, if the bar raiser doesn't think you're right for the business, you're not going to get in. The converse is, if the hiring manager doesn't want you, but the bar raiser thinks you're great, you're still probably not also going to get into the business, because it's just no bar raiser is going to try and force a hiring manager to hire someone that they really don't want to hire. That would just be the most awful circumstances to put a new employee into. So no one would do that. Your bar raiser, if they think you're wonderful, they'll probably go back into the kind of the recruiting system and say, guys, we've got this most phenomenal candidate. They weren't right for that role. Let's go see if we can find them something else.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there and I touched on it early on, and it's I guess the fundamental part of Amazon, and that's the leadership principles. So the leadership principles are what everything is based around at Amazon. So whether or not you're working on a project or you're making a decision, they're always justified at the end of the day using the leadership principles. And that's from right at the top with Jeff right down to the lower levels of the business. That is the culture of Amazon, is almost the leadership principles. So can you tell us a little bit more about the leadership principles, perhaps at a high level, and also maybe around what leadership principles people should focus on for different roles? Are there slightly different focuses for different roles? Should people think about them differently when they're coming into different areas of the business?
Yeah, okay. So the leadership principles, I tend to think of them a bit more like the 10 Commandments, quite honestly, without making it too dramatic. They're not brand values. They're not meant to be a story that Amazon tells its customers in the way that brand values for other businesses are stories for customers. They're not that. The leadership principles are an instruction manual for employees. And that's why there's 14 of them, because they basically tell you how you need to operate as a leader/employee at Amazon. So an Amazonian is expected to be incredibly close to the detail. Whatever level you're at, whether you're a SVP or whether you're an L4, you are expected to really know the nuts and bolts of what's going on in your org, and that's dive deep. If it's a matrix organization, so everybody has to be able to get on with other people, even at times of tension, and that earns trust. You have to be able to build relationships and manage choppy waters. They are the DNA of the organization. So in any meeting that anybody has, the likelihood is they will talk about the leadership principles. There are shortcuts, they're like, some of them are like 6 lines long. They're a shortcut of language that means I could say to you, Andrew, I think we need to dive a bit deeper on this piece of analysis. And that's all I need to say. You'd say, yeah, okay, Gigi, well, these are the 4 different pieces of further analysis that I think I can do. I'll go away and do them and I'll come back. Equally, I'd say to you, Andrew, I think we need to show some bias for action now. Andrew, what would that mean to you?
Bias for action. Oh well, sorry.
Sorry to be
Bias for action. I was going to talk about bias for action as well, because that was one of my favorite ones, and I think that's something that people need to focus on a lot more in the data space, and that is essentially taking calculated risks. Right, speed is very important in business, and Amazon's one of these businesses that channels that very closely. So they don't mind failing. So something they say to you at Amazon is, don't worry about failing, just fail fast, right? If you're going to try it. We don't actually mind if it goes wrong, but we want to know very quickly if it's going to go wrong. We don't want to waste resource and time on something that doesn't get us anywhere. And that's something that I think businesses need to be learning a lot more about in the data and data science space is moving quickly, not trying to build the most complex thing in the world that's going to take 12 weeks. Do something simple, which is going to, like an MVP approach, which gets buy-in from everyone. Everyone understands what's going on. We get touch points in each of the teams so everyone knows what it is that's going on. And then if we want to build on that and enhance that further down the track, then that's fine too, because we've already got the foundations in place and we've got something in front of the customer, in front of the stakeholders. So that was one which I always really liked.
So it's a shortcut. I can say that one word to you, and there's a million things that you know exactly what I meant, and off you go. It's a massive time saver.
And these, for everyone, these are conversations Gigi and I actually had at Amazon. Yes! So we worked very closely together. So Andrew, can you dive a bit deeper on that? Was something I heard probably every day.
Yes.
Anyway, the other ones that I liked from a data point of view, because I know people watching in my audience will be coming from a data point of view. So dive deep, like you say, that was always, I'm not going to say number one, but dive deep was always something that was heavily considered. And that is that people interviewing, when they're talking to me about a project, they know the details of that project in terms of what they did, and it comes back to the STAR approach, really. They know the details of what it was, but they know the details of what the results were. They know the details of what the impact was, whether that be on dollars or that was time saved or whatever it may be. They know the details. And like you said, that doesn't matter if it's somebody right up high in the business or somebody at the bottom of the business. Nobody is above the details at Amazon. Everyone needs to be very detail focused. The other one which I really liked using in data focused interviews was Learn and Be Curious, which is all about finding, because it was a shortcut way for me to understand if this person was genuinely passionate about the field and the industry that they're working in, rather than just somebody who's going to turn up every day and just do what's necessary and then go home, which is fine. I want to know people are really passionate about improving things, or passionate about finding new solutions, or passionate about introducing new concepts to the company, because that's what's going to get you ahead. And that's what Amazon likes too. They want new people coming in to have new ideas that can help them move forward, rather than just keep churning away the way they've always been churning. And then obviously the other one that's really, really important, and you're never, ever, ever going to escape talking about this one, is customer obsession. I would almost say that is, if you were talking broadly across Amazon interviews, that would probably be the one that you always need to at least showcase that you're thinking about, would be customer obsession. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, when Jeff started his organization, I think it was 1996, his goal was to make it Earth's most customer-centric company. And that is still absolutely the driving force behind Amazon. Customer obsession, customer obsession, customer obsession. And that can both be your external customer, i.e. the person that's buying something off the website or using the AWS services, but also your internal customer. And I think this is really important for people in analytics roles. Often your customer is not necessarily the end user, or ultimately they will be, but your customer is the numpty in marketing who came to you with a really silly question and said, Andrew, can you go away and see if you can answer this question for me, please? So customer obsession, I say to people, there are 3 LPs that are just like non-negotiable. Somebody has to be impressed with you, regardless of where you are recruiting for in Amazon. Customer obsession is the first one. Dive deep is the second one. And we should probably talk a little bit more about dive deep and analytics people in a second. But the third one is deliver results. You mentioned it a second ago, Andrew, talking about the context of dive deep, which is you have to show people that the work that you have done has delivered incremental benefit to the business. There is no point in you doing the most incredible piece of analytics with the most innovative kind of capabilities and theories if it doesn't actually turn into money in the broadest sense of the term. If Amazon is paying your salary, they want ROI on that salary. So you really do need to think of what results did my work deliver, regardless of where you're in the business, but definitely I'd say for the data guys. Dive deep. I think this is, I mean, you'd be a good one to talk about this one, Andrew. Amazonians as a group of people are all highly analytical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a marketer, and obviously there is a kind of a stereotype of marketers that we're all fluffy people and we do the coloring in, and that's true to a degree, but marketers in Amazon are highly numerate. They are deeply data driven. So when you are in the data field and you're partnering with people like marketers, you have to kind of raise your expectations in terms of what they know and what they can understand, and perhaps give them a bit more of the benefit of the doubt than you might do somewhere else, that you can challenge them to tell them more about what you've done, help them work with you and ask good questions of you, rather than just kind of take your output and say, fine, thank you, I'm not going to ask you any questions on it. So the one you didn't mention, Andrew, is earns trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important working with the data teams, because every decision is going to be based on data. So I don't know what your code is. I don't know how good your code is, but I trust that if I've asked you to do something, that you will apply the appropriate level of rigor and checks, and that you will have appropriately interpreted what I have requested. But in order for me to trust you, you need to give me evidence. You need to give me enough information so I feel confident that what you've done is going to take me where I want to be. What no one in Amazon is going to want is to throw you a question and just have you come back with the answer and say, yep, Chuck, thanks very much, and go off. It's not going to happen. So as a data person, you have to be comfortable with being challenged and asked to explain to a degree what it is that you've done. And that's how you're going to earn trust. I think earn trust is really important for data guys.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what you were saying earlier about the level of data literacy at Amazon is, when I started Amazon, it was a stark difference from anywhere else I'd worked with really clever people before, but it's true. Everybody in the business is extremely data literate, and that's because of the interview process. It's a prerequisite almost, that people need that ability to interpret and use data, because Amazon uses data to run their business. So you need to be able to do that well. So it's absolutely true. If you're a data scientist or a data analyst and you are working with people in marketing or product, that normally, like you say, the stereotype is that the analyst does the numbers and the marketeer does the pictures. When you get to Amazon, it's a whole nother world. There's no bluffing anybody with some technical jargon, because they'll know what you're talking about and they will challenge you on it, and they will, or if they don't necessarily know, they will, like you say, ask the right probing questions to get the understanding that they need in order to trust what you're doing, to understand that there's no risk to their customers. So for example, you're working in marketing, you essentially own the customers that we're going to be talking to, or providing some feature for. You're not going to trust what I'm doing for you for your customers. And if I can't explain it and I can't showcase to you that, when X happens, Y is going to happen as a result, then you're just going to say, no, thanks, that's going on the shelf. I need you to explain it to me in a way that means I understand it, and therefore we'll go ahead with it. And if you can do that at Amazon as an analyst or a data scientist, you're going to be very successful, because the things that you're building are going to add value. And if you keep adding value, that's your pathway to getting promoted, or whether or not you move out of Amazon and you move into another role. But it's true across the board. It's true across the board. If you add value rather than just sit there and be very clever, but you can't communicate those things, you'll end up being the one that is promoted, because at Amazon you have the evidence that you have added value over time, and therefore that's an easy conversation to have.
Yeah, and actually it occurs to me we should talk about the writing sample. I
absolutely need to say that. Yeah, so
we should talk about the writing sample.
You talk a bit more about that I won't talk about that because I've never had to assess a writing sample. I know I had to do one when I interviewed there, but if you've had to assess one, maybe you could talk in a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So anyone who's applying for an L6 role or above has to do a writing sample that they submit in advance of their panel debrief. Some roles, you'll have to submit a writing sample for more junior roles. Product managers, for example, if you're an L5, you'll need to do a writing sample. And the reason is all decisions in Amazon are made based on a meeting where you write a document. It might be a 1-pager, a 2-pager, a 6-pager, but you write a document in long form, Word, Calabri, point 11, just make a note of it, people. And you write a doc and you present your data and your arguments and your recommendation through a written document. So that means that being able to write, having the skill to communicate complex concepts in a clear, concise, and kind of brief manner is incredibly important, because you've only got an hour in that meeting. Everyone walks in the room. The first 30 minutes are basically people reading the document. The next 30 minutes are people discussing the document, and then hopefully you get to a decision. If you haven't written a really clear document, then 30 minutes isn't going to be enough, and you're going to end up with a load of questions and your meeting will just go to hell. So being able to write clearly and concisely is super important, which is why everybody L6 and above has to do a writing sample. So if you apply, even in a data scientist role for an L6 or above, you will be asked to do a writing sample. The writing sample will be based on a leadership principle question. So tell me about a time when you realized you were at risk of missing a key deadline, something like that. And you have to write 2 pages, no more than 2 pages, to tell that story. Now, my guidance to everyone is to follow the STAR/STARI. I have my own innovation for the STAR format, but to follow that format. But in that format, you need to tell your story of situation, task, action, result. It needs to be concise. It needs to be specific. And that will then be assessed by the hiring manager and the bar raiser. It's not going to be, I guess, a catastrophe if you aren't the best writer. Writing and the skill of writing is very coachable. You talk a lot at Amazon about coachability of a particular leadership principle or a particular skill. And even the best writer takes time in Amazon to become an Amazon standard writer. No one, I think, lands in Amazon with incredible writing skills, very few. So you have to learn it along the way. You need a good basic foundation. So I'd say to you guys, if you're ever recruiting for Amazon and you're asked to do the writing sample, please take it seriously, because it will matter. The bar raiser will read it. And if it's catastrophic, the conversation will be had as to whether this person is coachable to be able to write the types of documents that they will have to write in order to have decisions made based on their data and their analysis.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you come across at Amazon, like you say, when you go into a meeting to present the idea for a project, for example, you don't really use slides like you would in other companies. You write a document because you need to convey the narrative of that proposal, for example. And it is interesting. You all sit there, like Gigi said, in silence for 10 or 15 minutes or half an hour, sometimes if it's longer, while everybody in the room, and this could be right up to senior management, read through your document, and they're often getting their pens out and scribbling notes. And it's a really unnerving time, isn't it? Because you can see them, like we're saying, the people at Amazon are not at Amazon because they're idiots. They're very, very sharp people, and they will find the holes that you have missed in your logic. No matter if it's a complex data science thing that they don't specifically understand, they will understand where the logic does not make sense, and they will pull you up on it. Not necessarily in a bad way. That's what they're there for. They're there to make sure that everything's working as it should, and that it makes sense. But I want to go back for a second, because we all know the STAR approach, but you've just said that you've made a little innovation on that. What is STARI?
STARI, okay. So if you do want to go and have a look at my YouTube channel, there's a video there which is called The Hidden Leadership Principle. And in that video, in the moment, I came up with this concept of STARI. I shocked myself. It goes to show how well I plan my videos. I just kind of make them up as I go along. So STARI. So there used to be a leadership principle called vocally self-critical. It's no longer, it was there when I interviewed, it's no longer there. It's now been incorporated into Earns Trust. But being vocally self-critical, and Andrew, you'll know this, and anyone in Amazon who works there, they're all highly self-critical. That's why they tend to be high performers, because they're always looking for ways to make themselves better, right? So when you are interviewing someone, you want to be convinced that they will always grow. And this is my point. This is the point about you're looking for someone who has long-term growth potential at Amazon when you're a bar raiser. The best way to grow is to be self-aware, is to be self-critical. So the STARI format is effectively, you've got your situation, your task, your action, and the result. And then the extra one, which is an I, is improvement. So I recommend to people that every time you go through an answer, you tag on the end, if I could go back, this is how I could do it better. And by the way, when I did it again a month later, I applied that, and oh, look, I got an even better result. Because it shows your interviewer that you have that vocally self-critical, which is, even though it's not a leadership principle, it's deeply ingrained in Amazonians. So they still talk about it, even though it's not a leadership principle. It shows that you're deeply self-aware, that you're always wanting to do better, insist on the highest standards, and that you are taking action when you've recognized something that you did wrong or that you could have done better. So I use situation, task, action, result, improvement, STARI.
That's a very, very good one as well, because I know that if you don't prepare for that, you will be asked about it. I know in any interview that I ran for Amazon, speaking to, say, data scientists or data analysts, they would be talking about a project that they have done, and without fail, every time I would have a question about what would you have done differently had you been able to start again, or even what other models did you consider, for example. So it is definitely good to prepare for that, because that will be a question that comes your way. I was wanting to ask you, so this is something that I actually never knew if it was an actual thing or not during all of my time interviewing.
Okay.
So people have told me, and I've heard that there is a blacklist. So if you interview for Amazon and you unfortunately miss out on getting a role, I've heard that you're not essentially able to apply again for some period of time, like 6 months. Is that something which actually exists, or is it not?
Yeah, it's a very foggy area, Andrew. I mean, there's no blacklist, right? There's no master list anywhere that says don't ever speak to this person again. So definitely no blacklist. There is a growing concept, and I think this is because of how many people are now applying for Amazon interviews, and therefore how much throughput is happening, where recruiters are making a recommendation that if you don't pass your interview, that you have a kind of a moratorium, I think is probably the best term for it, where you don't apply again for 6 months. Some recruiters, depending on the role, are saying 12 months. As far as I'm aware, there's no black and white policy for this. So you're best to take the guidance from your recruiter. But equally, there are some teams that don't apply that moratorium. And I get DMs from people who have had a few interviews 1 or 2 months apart. So I think the best thing to do in that circumstance is to just ask your recruiter outright and say, okay, this one didn't work out for me. I'm keen to keep applying. Is there any reason why I shouldn't apply for another role? And see what they say. But definitely no blacklist, but on some teams and some roles, they will request a moratorium.
Yeah, because I had interviewed people when I was there who had interviewed before, and then they actually went on to successfully land a role the second time. So it does seem like you can absolutely apply again, but I didn't know if there was a certain time period. The other thing that is somewhat related is that on some occasions you will interview somebody who is a great fit for Amazon, but there is almost an idea that they might be a better fit for another team as well. And I know that there have been people that are suggested to interview or to meet other people. Is that something that you dealt with as well? Yeah.
So sometimes it kind of speaks to the point where there are some leadership principles that, for individual roles, different leadership principles are more important than others. We just covered some that we felt were more important from the data space. So what you'll find is when you're assessing anybody, nobody is strong in every single leadership principle. It'll be a mixture. Some leadership principles, they'll be strong, some they'll have mild strengths, some they'll have mixed, some there'll be concerns and strong concerns. So that mixture of mixed to mild strength to strength is important, because for some roles, that mixture that you've got isn't quite right. They kind of needed you to be a bit stronger on those two, and actually those were the ones that you were mixed on. Whereas they can see that the ones that you were strong on are probably a better fit for another role. So what you will find is there's a candidate where you think, actually, they do raise the bar overall, but where their strengths lie is not actually in this particular skill set, leadership principle bias that we're looking for. And they'd be way happier if they went off and did this other role. So what you'll do, like I said earlier, is your bar raiser will often say, well, actually, this person's a way better fit for, I don't know, business development manager. They've got such amazing earns trust. They've got such amazing delivers results. We're interviewing them here for a brand manager. Why are we doing that? We should be employing them as a business development manager, and they will work with recruiters to say, right, lads, we got a good one here. It's probably not a hire for this role, but let's go and see if we can find them another role as a business development manager.
Nice. All right. Well, we've got about 5 or so minutes left. So if you were to quickly summarize some of the mistakes is not maybe the right word I want to say, but it's the only word that's coming to mind. What are some of the common mistakes that people make in Amazon interviews that might hurt their chances of being successful?
Okay. So one big one is not having enough breadth of examples. So what you're really trying to achieve is to be able to demonstrate to your interviewer that you consistently, repeatedly have excellent bar-raising examples of the different leadership principles. If you find yourself in a position where you're repeating the same example over and over, your interviewers and your panels are going to think, this person's probably only got a couple of good examples in their career history. And that's not enough evidence to make us feel that when they join our business, that every single day they're going to be brilliant and doing new and interesting things every single time. So I would really suggest people avoid repeating the same examples over and over. I get that question quite a lot. That is a mistake. Once you've got kind of a couple of repeats coming through in that data set in debrief, you start to worry that this candidate just doesn't have the range of skill and capability consistently that you're looking for. So that's a big one. My pet hate, my second one, is what I call the 10,000 feet answer, where you rattle through your STAR example in 45 seconds to a minute, and it is just ridiculously high level. It's just a basic summary that you write on the back of a fag packet. Your interviewer they need detail. You only find out the evidence of leadership principles in the detail. And as an interviewer, there is nothing worse than having to drag data out of the interviewing, right? Really, you want them to give you bags and bags of really good data. So the questions that you can ask are the really challenging, nitty-gritty type questions. You don't want to have to ask the very basic questions of, hang on, can you just tell me why did you not like it? Did he like it? Was he happy? Was he not happy? You don't want to do those. You want to use your time to ask the really detailed questions. You want them to give you a good, deep answer. So that's my second one. Don't do the 10,000 feet answer. And then the third one is a bit of a tension on that one, is over talking. When people get nervous, it's understandable, bless them. They over talk. They repeat themselves. They use far more words than they need to use in a sentence. That eats time. That just wastes your time and wastes my typing. So I would really encourage people to practice your STAR answers. Crisp, concise, don't repeat yourself. Those are my big three.
Yeah, I think those are really good pieces of advice. So if we were to think about the key things to think about if you're about to go in for an Amazon interview would be focus your answers around the leadership principles, because they are essentially the crux of the question you're being asked is to relate back to a leadership principle. That's what the interviewer is being tasked to do. So if you can do that, then you're going to tick a lot of the right boxes. And then obviously the STAR or the STARI, which I've just learned about, format is key, isn't it? Because that, again, is the interviewers are looking to tick those boxes as you go. So if you're delivering the right sort of examples in the right way, you're actually going to do really well. If you were to simplify things down to a really high level, I think for me, those are the two things to really focus on. Would you add anything there at a super high level?
No, those are the two, right? You're going to get into Amazon if you raise the bar on the leadership principles. You could be the world's best coder, right? Creating amazing output. But if you don't raise the bar on the leadership principles, you're not coming in. It's as simple as that. So when you're doing your preparation for Amazon, you really have to take those leadership principles seriously. They are your only ticket through the door. The second thing is, sorry, Andrew, STAR. Like, you want to make my job as an interviewer as easy as possible. The less work I have to do, the more inclined I am going to be to hiring you, because I'm going to see the information rather than spending all of my cognitive load trying to get clarity from you as a candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very last question, and I think it's an interesting one. Can you cheat the Amazon interview process as a candidate?
As a candidate, can you cheat? I've seen things on YouTube where interview coaches say you can. You can't, right? You can't, because the point of the Amazon process is not to trick you up. It's to find the evidence from your past. That's the whole purpose, is just to find that information from the past. So any skills that you learn from me or from an interview coach are simply skills to help you better articulate that evidence from the past. So it's easier for me as an interviewer to find it. So whatever you're learning from your interview coach, it's not going to be cheating. It's skills to make it easier for your interviewer to find the evidence. The only way to cheat, and we'll talk about whether you're ever going to be successful, is to make up things that didn't happen in order to be able to have an example for earns trust. The problem there is Amazon interviewers are so experienced, and they are going to ask you such probing questions. 99.999 recurring times, your made-up example will crumble. And there is no surer way to a rejection than for an interviewer to think you're making something up. You are almost defaulted to a not hire if they think you're making examples up. So I've done it. I've unpicked those made up examples myself before, and they certainly do crumble. But that, it's not a cheatable process, but it's not a process that's meant to do anything other than find the data from your past. So just use your examples. They're bound to be there. Just work out how best to frame them with STARI. Yeah,
I agree. I agree that a lot of people see it as quite an intimidating process to go through. And I've heard the same things for other companies like Google and Apple and whatnot. But the Amazon one, I know people have said that they're a little bit intimidated by the process because of things they've heard. But I think that's absolutely true. It can't be cheated. It is a very rigorous process. But nobody at Amazon is there to be mean to you. They're literally there to get the evidence they need to decide whether they want you to come on board for the company or not. And the way they go about their questions is evidence-based, because that's how Amazon works. They make all of their decisions based on evidence. So why would they do anything differently with their interview process? It is very rigorous. I agree completely.
Try and trip you up.
Yeah, in my view as well, there's no cheating. And like you say, the Amazon interviewers are very experienced. When you work at Amazon, you get the opportunity, if you're fortunate enough to become an interviewer, or like yourself, a bar raiser, you get the opportunity to interview a lot of people, because there is a lot of demand for the roles at Amazon, and there's some very highly skilled people applying for roles at Amazon. But it's only a very small proportion of people that do land those roles. So the Amazon interviewers are interviewing all the time. I mean, I was doing maybe 3 interviews a week, almost every week. And so you get very, very good at understanding the things that you are looking for that translate into a good Amazonian. Like I say, I think it's one of the best interviewing processes that I've ever come across. and absolutely it cannot be hacked or cannot be cheated. Although I did get accused of it here. Hold on, I got accused of hacking here. Look at this, Andrew, you hacker, nice try.
I wasn't on your loop, Andrew. Had I been, I'm sure I'd have smelt you.
No, you weren't actually. You weren't. I think I may have been intimidated had you been on it. But
no, I mean, I get why people are intimidated by the process. I mean, I have to say the reason why I took the offer from Amazon is I loved the process. I thought I loved a type of organization that puts that type of thought and effort and structure and process and time investment, right? The time invested by the people on the other side of the desk to you. You've got like 15 minutes maybe to read the CV. You've got an hour's interview. You've probably got another 45 minutes writing up your notes and making a decision. You've probably got another half an hour reading everybody else's notes before you go into the debrief. Then you've got another half an hour in the debrief. That's across like 5 to 7 people. Like that's the most enormous amount of hours invested in interviewing somebody who you might not even give the job to, you know? Yeah. I thought that was super impressive. And I thought if that's the type of organization, if that's what they do on facing the outside, you can only imagine the rigor and the process that you can look forward to on the inside. And I wasn't disappointed. It was what I expected it to be. Yeah. It's an incredible process. You just have to kind of just cope with the fact that there's rigor and there's structure, embrace it and value it and appreciate why it's there. And I think if you can appreciate why someone's asking you all of these very deep, detailed questions, like, did you call in before you walked into the room? Those types of questions. If you can appreciate it, it becomes less intimidating because you understand why it exists.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, if people focus on the leadership principles and they focus on answering the questions in the right way, using the STAR format, then there really isn't anything to be intimidated about. Just go and enjoy it. And if you are successful in getting into Amazon, I think both of us will vouch for the fact that it is an incredible place to work. There are some amazingly clever people that work there. And once you're on the inside, you see why this company is this enormous success of a company. But anyway, I think we will wrap up for now. Gigi, we've just gone over about an hour and 8 minutes, which is quite a long session. So thank you very, very much for joining me. I think it's been a great discussion, and hopefully it's been really beneficial to people that are looking to interview soon, or maybe have a dream of working at Amazon, as a lot of people do. So I think the things that you've covered here are super interesting and really, really useful. So thank you for that. And I will just mention that, Gigi, you have your YouTube channel, which is the Amazon Interview Whizz. So if you search for that on YouTube, you will find it. And there is some really, really, really good content on there. So if you are looking to interview at Amazon, I would say there isn't a better resource than that to go straight to the inside knowledge of what you need to be doing. And while it cannot be cheated and cannot be hacked, if you follow the advice that Gigi's offering, it will help you show your best Amazonian qualities to the interviewers, and that's all that we could wish to try and help you with, I think, at the moment. So
yeah, you want to just show that you are already an Amazonian. I think that's what the Amazon interview process is about. It's about finding the people who are Amazonians but just aren't yet on the payroll.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much, Gail. I will speak to you soon.
It's a pleasure. It's fun. Take care, Andrew.
Bye.